3 days before the wedding, my phone vibrated with a message that rearranged my entire understanding of my life in under 5 seconds. It was a screenshot. A familiar face. My fiancée. Her face cropped tight, filtered, angled the way she used to angle it when she wanted attention. Below it, a Tinder profile. Active. Current. Not old. Not abandoned. Not misunderstood. A clean bio that said she was looking for a serious man for a serious relationship. The timestamp on the profile showed recent activity. The wedding date was already printed on invitations that had been mailed, framed, and posted online. There was no confusion. No need to ask follow-up questions. No technical explanation that could save this. Tinder does not accidentally activate itself. Bios do not rewrite themselves. Profiles do not swipe on their own. Someone had chosen photos. Someone had typed words. Someone had been browsing other men while promising forever to me. The room around me stayed quiet, but my body reacted faster than my thoughts. My stomach tightened, not with shock, but with recognition. That unpleasant feeling I had pushed away for months finally had a name. This was not a sudden betrayal. This was confirmation. We had been together for 4 years. We had shared apartments, routines, holidays, and families. We had survived fights that were framed as normal relationship stress. I had learned to apologize first, to adjust, to be patient when she withdrew. I had accepted that her phone was private, that some questions made her uncomfortable, that independence mattered. I told myself this was maturity. What it really was training. In the months leading up to the wedding, she had become distant in ways that were easy to explain if you wanted to stay calm. Stress at work. Wedding planning fatigue. Anxiety about commitment. All common explanations. She slept facing away more often. She guarded her phone with new intensity. Notifications were silenced. Screens were tilted. Passwords were changed. She began spending more time at the gym, more time clearing her head, more time unavailable. I noticed everything. I documented nothing. I told myself trust meant not keeping score. The screenshot came from my best friend. He had not added commentary. He had not tried to soften the impact. He had simply sent the image and the timestamp. That restraint told me everything. This was not gossip. This was evidence. I sat there longer than I expected, scrolling through old photos on my own phone. Engagement pictures. Smiling faces. Her hand on my chest. My arm around her waist. Posts about soulmates and forever. The contrast between the public performance and the private behavior was no longer abstract. It was measurable. The most disturbing part was not that she was on Tinder. It was the wording of her bio. Serious man. Serious relationship. That phrasing erased me entirely. It did not describe curiosity or doubt. It described replacement. I replayed the last year with a different lens. The nights she came home later than usual. The sudden interest in solo trips. The way she had started accusing me of being emotionally unavailable whenever I asked simple questions. The pattern was now obvious. When someone wants to justify their exit, they start rewriting the narrative before they leave. I did not confront her. Not because I was unsure, but because I was done wasting energy on reactions that served other people. I needed information, not drama. I checked our shared calendar. 3 days until the ceremony. Vendors fully booked. Deposits paid. Guests traveling in. Families emotionally invested. A small industry had been built around our union. And behind the scenes, she was advertising herself as available. That night, she came home and acted normal. She talked about table arrangements and last-minute details. She mentioned a headache and an early night. She touched my arm briefly, mechanically, the way people touch objects they already own. I watched her the way one watches a process that has already failed but has not yet shut down. When she went to sleep, I stayed awake. I reviewed our financial accounts. I copied documents. I backed up messages. I confirmed the apartment lease details. I checked cancellation policies. I was not panicking. I was organizing. Sleep did not come. Not because of heartbreak, but because my brain was recalibrating. A future I had been preparing for was no longer valid. That required adjustments, not mourning. By morning, I had made several decisions. I would not beg. I would not argue. I would not perform disbelief for someone who had planned deception with intention. I would not rescue her from the consequences of her own actions. I also decided not to reveal everything at once. People who hide lives depend on timing. I would take that advantage away. She left for work the next morning after kissing my cheek and reminding me about a meeting with the florist. I watched the door close and felt something unexpected. Relief. Not peace, but clarity without theatrics. This was not the story of a man blindsided days before his wedding. This was the story of a man who finally stopped ignoring what had been placed in front of him repeatedly. The wedding was still 3 days away. She thought she had time. She was wrong. The day after the screenshot arrived, I stopped thinking like a fiancé and started thinking like someone preparing an exit from a compromised agreement. Emotional processing was a luxury for later. What mattered now was control of information, timing, and exposure. She had already made her choices in private. I would make mine quietly. I went to work and behaved normally. I answered emails, attended meetings, and kept my phone face down. Outward stability gave me room to plan without interference. Inside, I was reconstructing the last 4 years with a different logic. Every unexplained argument. Every sudden boundary. Every accusation that I was inattentive or stagnant. These were not random conflicts. They were positioning statements. She had been detaching while making sure the fault line appeared to run through me. At lunch, I reviewed the screenshot again. I looked past her face and focused on the details most people miss. The photos were recent. Her hair length matched the present. One of the pictures had been taken in our living room, cropped to remove identifying objects. She had planned this. She had curated herself as single while still benefiting from the stability of our shared life. That afternoon, I contacted the venue under the pretense of confirming details. I asked procedural questions. Cancellation timelines. Contract clauses. Refund policies. I learned exactly how much flexibility remained and how much leverage silence still allowed me. I did not cancel anything yet. I needed alignment first. At home, she continued wedding talk as if nothing had changed. She discussed seating conflicts between relatives. She worried about dress fittings. She complained about how exhausting it all felt. I listened without responding more than necessary. Her performance depended on my participation. I reduced my role to observer. That night, I paid attention to patterns instead of words. Her phone stayed face down. It vibrated occasionally. She checked it only when she thought I was distracted. Her posture changed when she typed, shoulders forward, guarded. This was not new behavior. I had just stopped excusing it. I checked her social media activity while she slept. No visible red flags. That was intentional. Tinder was hidden because it was disposable. Social platforms were curated for appearances. People who plan exits protect the visible channels first. The next morning, I took a day off. I told her it was for errands. That was partially true. I visited my bank and separated what could be separated. I moved my personal funds into an account she had no access to. I documented balances. I scanned agreements. I did not drain anything joint. I was not interested in retaliation disguised as self-defense. I was interested in clean lines. I met my best friend later that day. He filled in the gaps I had not asked about yet. He had come across her profile by accident. He had verified it was active. He had waited several hours before sending it to me, hoping it was a mistake. It had not disappeared. It had updated. That detail mattered. It meant intent continued after discovery. I asked him not to tell anyone else. Not yet. Public reactions collapse leverage. Silence preserves it. By the second evening, I was no longer angry. Anger assumes a shared reality has been violated. This situation was different. We had not been living in the same reality for some time. I had just been operating under outdated assumptions. She noticed the change. My reduced engagement registered as distance. She attempted course correction. More affection. More reassurance. More talk about the future. This was not guilt. This was asset protection. I represented stability, image, and convenience. She was trying to keep all options open until the last moment. I went through with one final test. I asked a neutral question about our plans after the wedding. Nothing accusatory. Nothing specific. Her response was vague, flexible, and non-committal. It mirrored the language of her Tinder bio without the words. Serious, but undefined. Future-oriented, but unspecific. She was keeping space for outcomes that did not include me. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because the situation had improved, but because uncertainty had been replaced with confirmation. The brain handles bad news better than unresolved doubt. On the second-to-last day before the wedding, I made the first irreversible move. I canceled the honeymoon reservations. Not out of spite, but out of logic. There was no reason to fund a shared future that no longer existed. The cancellation email arrived quietly. No alarms. No confrontation. She did not notice. Or she noticed and chose not to mention it. Either way, it reinforced my assessment. Her attention was elsewhere. I also drafted a message to close family and friends. I did not send it yet. It was factual. Short. Devoid of blame or explanation. I would not be managing narratives. I would be stating outcomes. By that evening, I knew something else with certainty. This was not about temptation or fear of commitment. People who are afraid delay weddings. They do not advertise themselves to strangers days before walking down the aisle. This was about replacement shopping. She was securing backups. The final confirmation came unexpectedly. While she showered, her phone lit up with a notification preview she had forgotten to disable. A dating app alert. Brief. Generic. Sufficient. I did not pick up the phone. I did not screenshot it. I did not need more proof. The decision had already been made. There was one day left until the wedding. She believed time was on her side. She believed she was managing risk. She believed I was unaware. The only thing she was wrong about was the most important part. I was done pretending. The final day before the wedding began with routine movements and an unfamiliar sense of detachment. I watched her move through the apartment as if we were actors rehearsing lines for an audience that had not yet arrived. She packed a small bag for the night, mentioning a last-minute stay with a friend to avoid seeing the dress before the ceremony. The explanation was tidy. It was also unnecessary. By that point, explanations had lost their function. Once she left, the apartment felt different. Not emptier, just quieter. I used the time deliberately. I removed my personal items first, starting with documents, electronics, and anything irreplaceable. Then I moved on to clothing and items with financial value. I left shared objects untouched. I was not erasing her. I was separating. I printed copies of everything I might need later. Contracts. Receipts. Bank statements. Lease terms. I saved digital backups in multiple locations. This was not paranoia. It was preparation. When relationships collapse under deception, memory becomes unreliable. Paper does not. By midday, I had confirmed cancellations with vendors that could still be stopped without financial damage. I did not explain. I cited personal reasons. Professional vendors hear that phrase often. They do not ask questions. I postponed informing guests until the last possible moment. Not to protect her, but to avoid chaos while I finalized my position. Timing matters. Once information is public, control is lost. In the afternoon, I received a message from her checking in. Casual. Affectionate. She asked if everything was ready. I responded briefly and neutrally. No warmth. No hostility. The absence of emotional cues unsettles people who rely on them. I spent the next hours drafting the message I would send to our families. It avoided accusations. It avoided details. It stated that the wedding would not take place and that further explanations would not be provided. This was intentional. People fill silence with assumptions, and assumptions often land closer to the truth than curated stories. By evening, everything was aligned. Financial exposure minimized. Logistics addressed. Evidence secured. There was nothing left to wait for. She returned late that night. The apartment lights were on. My bags were visible by the door. There was no dramatic pause, no raised voices, no collapse into denial. She understood immediately that the script had changed. I told her the wedding was cancelled. I did not reference screenshots. I did not mention Tinder. I did not justify the decision. Explanations invite debate. Debate assumes negotiability. There was none. She attempted to redirect the conversation. She spoke quickly, offering partial acknowledgments and premature apologies without context. This was not accountability. This was damage control triggered too late. I stayed consistent. I told her the relationship was over. I told her she needed to make arrangements to stay elsewhere. I told her I would communicate with family and vendors. Each statement was delivered once. Repetition would have implied doubt. She asked how I knew. I did not answer. People who live double lives believe information is currency. They think withholding sources preserves power. In reality, refusing to disclose removes the last illusion of control. There was a moment where she shifted tactics. Emotional appeals replaced explanations. Promises replaced responsibility. She framed the situation as stress, confusion, pressure. She framed herself as overwhelmed, not deceptive. This reframing required me to accept a version of events where my role was caretaker, not partner. I declined. I left that night with my bags. Not because I was expelled, but because there was no reason to stay. The apartment was no longer a shared space. It was a staging area for a life I had exited. I stayed with a friend. Sleep came easily. Not because I felt victorious, but because unresolved tension had finally been resolved. The body responds to finality with relief, even when the outcome is painful. In the early morning, I sent the message to our families and close friends. It was brief. It was factual. It requested privacy. I turned off my phone afterward. I was not interested in managing reactions in real time. By the time the sun came up on what was supposed to be our wedding day, the The narrative had already shifted beyond her control. People had questions. She had no prepared answers that could survive scrutiny. Silence became her only option. I did not attend the venue. I did not put on the suit. I did not perform closure for an audience. I chose absence over spectacle. Instead, I went for a long walk. I thought about how close I had come to legally binding myself to someone who was actively advertising for a replacement. I thought about how often people confuse longevity with loyalty. I thought about how many warnings I had ignored because they arrived quietly. The wedding date passed without ceremony. There were no vows. No applause. No photographs to explain later. Just a clean break and an intact future. She lost the narrative. She lost the timing. She lost the advantage of surprise. And she understood, finally, that whatever she had been searching for on Tinder had cost her the one thing she had assumed was guaranteed. One part remained unfinished. The aftermath did not arrive as a single event. It unfolded in waves, predictable in pattern, disappointing in execution. Within hours, messages began to surface through indirect channels. Friends asking if everything was okay. Relatives expressing shock. A few people trying to mediate without understanding what they were mediating. I kept my phone off and let the noise exhaust itself. She tried to regain control of the story. That much was inevitable. When deception collapses, the next move is revision. She framed the cancellation as mutual confusion. As a breakdown caused by stress. As a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. None of those explanations could coexist with the timing. People are willing to forgive many things. They are less forgiving of math that does not add up. By midday, she reached out directly. Not with apologies that acknowledged harm, but with regret over consequences. She expressed disbelief that everything had ended so suddenly. She asked for a conversation. She suggested closure. These requests were not about resolution. They were about restoring influence. I did not respond. The vendors followed next. Some confused. Some sympathetic. All professional. Money was recovered where possible. Losses were documented and accepted. Financial damage heals faster than legal entanglement. I had avoided the latter by days. Later that afternoon, I learned what she had not anticipated. Someone else had already seen the profile. Another mutual acquaintance. Then another. Tinder is not private. It is a public market with rotating visibility. She had assumed secrecy because she wanted secrecy. Reality had other plans. Her family contacted me that evening. The tone was restrained. Careful. They asked if there had been an argument. I told them the wedding was cancelled because trust had been broken beyond repair. I did not provide specifics. They did not push. Silence answered enough. She attempted one final approach. Not directly, but through sentiment. Old photos resurfaced. Memories referenced. Inside jokes mentioned. This was nostalgia weaponized. It only works when the other person is unsure of the present. I was not. What she never understood was this: the discovery itself was not what ended the relationship. It was the timeline. 3 days before a wedding is not a mistake window. It is a declaration of intent. People reveal their priorities most clearly when deadlines approach. Hers had been revealed. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt routine before emotion. Structure before reflection. Gym. Work. Sleep. Friends. I did not rush closure. I did not romanticize recovery. I let reality do what it does best when not interfered with. Eventually, curiosity replaced anger. Not about her actions, but about my tolerance. Why I had accepted distance as normal. Why I had equated silence with peace. The answers were uncomfortable but useful. I adjusted accordingly. I heard later that she stayed active on dating apps for a while. That she explained the cancelled wedding as a mutual decision. That she avoided specifics. This consistency told me everything. Accountability would have required stillness. She chose motion. There was no dramatic revenge. No public exposure. No final confrontation. Just absence. Absence is harder to rewrite than conflict. Months later, when the wedding date came up in memories and calendars, it no longer carried weight. It marked a narrow escape. A point where a life could have locked into the wrong direction permanently, but did not. The screenshot that started everything was still saved on my phone for a time. Not as a wound, but as a reference. Proof that instincts matter. That discomfort is information. That commitment means nothing without alignment. I eventually deleted it. Not because it stopped mattering, but because it had done its job.